Botanists of Reddit, what are the scariest plants in the world? Story 1, Manchineels, beach apples, look like small apples, but eating them will give you a terrible time. Even worse, the sap is really toxic, and if you stand near a machine during rain, just a small drop of the sap can immediately cause burn-like blisters on the skin. Some people say that the sap is so toxic that it even destroys car paint. If you get sap on the hand and then in a moment of temporary dumbness touch your eyes, you could get blind. The Spanish call them Manzania de la Muerte, which translates to little apple of death, although no deaths in modern times caused by machinals are known. Story 2, water hemlock, cicuta, is fairly common in North America and very toxic. It can be fatal when even small amounts are ingested and resembles other non-toxic plants that are edible. Even just touching your lips or skin to the plant has been fatal for children. It causes swelling in the brain, blood coagulation problems, tremors, seizures, kidney failure, among other issues. Death is usually caused by respiratory arrest and or ventricular fibrillation. Story 3, not a botanist, but I wanted to toss a vote in for poison ivy. I got into it a couple of years ago and accidentally got it all over my eyes, face, neck, and chest. I was newly pregnant, so I couldn't take steroids. I basically lived in an oatmeal bath for 4 weeks. During that time, I learned about poison ivy. Know your enemies. And the more I learned, the more I grew to really, really hate it. First, you don't develop an allergy to it until you're exposed. For some people, this is after lots of exposures, and some people never at all. But each exposure doesn't help develop an immunity. It just doubles down on the effects. It also never dies, really. No matter what you do to kill it, the urushiol in all parts of the plant will remain active for basically forever. 100-year-old long-dead vines in a collapsed barn were found with active urushiol, so it's basically an immortal poison. Finally, if you ever burn it intentionally or by accident, inhaling even the smallest amount of its smoke can be fatal. So, poison ivy, it's top of the list for me. Story 4, Nepenthes attenboroughii, the only carnivorous plant known to have eaten a mammal in the wild. They're also large. Big pitchers can be the size of a human head. Venus flytraps are scarier than you'd think, too. I saw a video on YouTube once of a man who thought it'd be fun to tape one of the traps to his fingertip. His finger turned gray, lost circulation, and was being digested in less than 24 hours. The trap wasn't even attached to the plant at the time. Flytraps aren't really dangerous to people, though, unless you're an idiot like that guy. I've seen pictures of some large feral ones in California that had captured tree frogs. Hogweed, manchineels, and Gympy are well documented for skin lesions. Actia pachypoda, doll's eyes, or whitebaneberry. These are kind of creepy because the berries really do look like tiny little eyes. The first time I saw one was real late in the year, and the foliage had already died off, so there was just a red stalk with white eyes on it. It is also very poisonous and will cause heart attacks if you eat the berry. But for all that, the scariest plant to me is poison ivy. We do have hogweed where I live, but they're pretty obvious and relatively easy to avoid. Poison ivy, on the other hand, can be remarkably easy to overlook. You get that oil on you and it can spread everywhere. I've had large portions of my body covered several times. Yes, even the genitals. Usually I didn't even know I'd come in contact with this stuff. So, to me, that's the scariest plant in the world. Story 5, Reutria Japonica is not so harmful to humans, but it is an invasive species that you can't just dig up and throw out with the other weeds. It needs to be burned and be kept under strict control so it doesn't return. From Wikipedia, it is listed by the World Conservation Union as one of the world's worst invasive species. 19. The invasive root system and strong growth can damage concrete foundations, buildings, flood defenses, roads, paving, retaining walls, and architectural sites. It can also reduce the capacity of channels and flood defenses to carry water. It is a frequent colonizer of temperate riparian ecosystems, roadsides, and waste places. It forms thick, dense colonies that completely crowd out any other herbaceous species and is now considered one of the worst invasive exotics in parts of the eastern United States. The success of the species has been partially attributed to its tolerance of a very wide range of soil types, pH, and salinity. Its rhizomes can survive temperatures of minus 35 degrees Celsius, minus 31 degrees Fahrenheit, and can extend 7 meters, 23 feet, horizontally and 3 meters, 10 feet, deep, making removal by excavation extremely difficult. The plant is also resilient to cutting, vigorously resprouting from the roots. Story 6. Kudzu Vines. My favorite joke. Some tourists driving through the south stopped to admire some lovely kudzu vines. They wanted some cuttings to take back home, and were delighted when a farmer told them they could take as much as they liked. Wanting to make sure the kudzu grew properly, the tourists asked the farmer if he had any advice for growing this beautiful vine. He responded, "Once you decide where you want to plant it, the best thing is to throw it down and run." Story 7. Not a botanist, but Erowid has convinced me Datura, deadly nightshade, is the scariest thing nature ever created. I was a little confused to see Datura called deadly nightshade, as I was under the impression they were two different plants. I did some Googling, and it turns out the reality is slightly more complicated. There are multiple plants that are called nightshade, but only two I've found frequent references to as deadly nightshade. The first is Solanum dulcamara, which is the plant I was familiar with as deadly nightshade, though it is also called bittersweet nightshade. This one's range covers most of Europe, a broad stripe across Asia reaching as far as Japan, and most of the USA as well as southern Canada. The other claimant to the name is Atropa belladonna, native to Europe and invasive in some parts of North America. I had heard Datura's common name as devil's trumpet, though Wikipedia informs me it is actually a genus name, whose members are also called thorn apples and Gyson weed. They belong to the same family as dulcamara. Given that a casual search yielded at least two plants commonly called deadly nightshade, I would not be surprised to learn there is a third. Story 8. Angel's trumpet, Bugmansia, part of the nightshade family. Via Wikipedia, the hallucinogenic effects of Bugmansia were described in the journal Pathology as terrifying rather than pleasurable. The author Christina Pratt, in an encyclopedia of shamanism, says that Brugmansia induces a powerful trance with violent and unpleasant effects, sickening after effects, and at times, temporary insanity. These hallucinations are often characterized by complete loss of awareness that one is hallucinating, disconnection from reality, psychosis, and amnesia of the episode, such as one example reported in Psychiatry and Clinical Neuroscience of a young man who amputated his own family jewels and tongue after drinking only 1 cup of Brugmansia tea. Story 9. Rosa bracteata, McCartney rose, an ornamental rose native to China that has become an invasive pest on the Texas Gulf Coast. Forms impenetrable, dome-shaped thorny thickets 10, 15 feet in diameter. Hips are readily eaten by birds and animals, which then spread the seeds, and when bulldozed and scraped off quickly grows back from the roots. Water hyacinth, Puntidaria crassipes, another exotic ornamental. Native to S. America's upper Amazon, it's been spread all over the world because it's such a pretty water plant with all those purple flowers until it spreads and covers an entire body of water in a matter of weeks. There have been cases of motorists in places like Texas pulling off the road onto what they thought was a shoulder, only for their vehicle to sink into the ditch hidden beneath the plants. On the plus side, manatees love the stuff, and their numbers have increased because of it. Story 10. The mushroom-destroying angel. Amanita virosa is one that gave me nightmares. It stops DNA replication in cells, causing them to die, affecting mainly the liver and kidneys. It takes hours for the symptoms to show up, and by that time, the damage is done. Usually, the only recourse is a transplant. It can look like a normal edible mushroom if picked before maturity, so it gets accidentally consumed. The scariest part of amanita poisoning is the walking death phase. You get severely sick at first, but then you start to feel better and appear to be recovering, but in reality at that point, you're well past the point of no return. You're dying, and you just have to wait around for your organs to start failing. Story 11. Jimpy, one of the most venomous plants in the world. In 1994, Australian ex-serviceman Cyril Bromley described how he happened to fall into the tree during military training. He was subsequently strapped to a hospital bed for 3 weeks and administered all sorts of treatments that proved unsuccessful. He described it as the worst period of his life, when the pain made him as mad as a cut snake. In one story I read, an army officer used it to wipe his bum, ended up shooting himself later that night. Opiates don't work on the pain. Story 12. Gout, weed, and mint. Those bad boys spread like crazy. I bought a 4 inches pot of gout weed and put it in my garden. It looked cute. It's in gardens in older neighborhoods. The green and white plant in the shade. Maybe 3 years later, I was removing a 5 by 10-foot area of the stuff from my lawn. It grew in under the garage, and there's still a bit of it lurking around, waiting to get established again. I love both of these plants for the same reason, both edible, ornamental, and determined to provide. Planting is key, though. Mint goes in the giant pots, goutweed in the strips surrounded by concrete and grass, with a rhizome barrier for good measure by the grass, and free, delicious food for forever. Story 13. Well, I'm no botanist, but I am an Australian. So for all of my Aussies on here, you're about to get some PTSD and Vietnam flashbacks from your childhood from what I'm about to mention. Cat's eyes, bullseyes, bindies, whatever you call them, you know their shape. A small brown seed with 3 big spikes coming out of it. If you're unlucky, the spikes break off in your skin and cause infections. If you're lucky, you feel like you've stepped on the worst Lego of your life. Truly a plant meant to cause the worst pain and make you wish you had a flamethrower handy. F them to the moon. We call them double G's here. The green ones are the worst to step on. Incidentally, extremely high amounts of iron, protein, and other minerals in them. They make excellent flour and the leaves can be eaten like spinach. Introduced for these reasons, then the spikes came. They also provide fodder for some varieties of cockatoo, who seem to love them. But yeah, they can crap in their hats. Story 14. Not a botanist, but the self-destroying plant is nuts. It's an Australian little plant covered in almost invisible, tiny stingers that detach very easily from the plant to your flesh. The toxin in those needles gives such a painful experience that horses have been seen jumping off from cliffs to end the pain. Also, the stingers are very fragile and tiny, so that the only way to remove them is with surgery. If not removed, the pain lasts forever. If they are all removed, the pain duration varies between days and weeks, but it doesn't fully stop. You'll feel it for the rest of your life. Sometimes after years that the stingers have been removed, a moment of top-tier pain can still be felt. Australia evolved a plant with all the anger in the world. Also, the native name for it is something like babunkadonk. Story 15, I'm going to give a different kind of answer. To me, forests are not botanists close enough. Invasive species are the scariest. Not usually by threat to me, but to the ecosystem as a whole. In the southern US, we have a lot of invasive shrubs and vines that choke out native trees and wildflowers. Easy examples for this are kudzu and Japanese honeysuckle. These types of plants ruin biodiversity and create a monoculture of invasives. And they cover a lot of ground too, along any roadside or any other waste area. Story 16, I'm definitely not a botanist, but when I was in Australia, I was near a so-called stinging tree. Contact with the leaves or twigs causes the hollow, silica-tipped hairs to break off, penetrate the skin, and inject the toxins. 9. The hairs cause an extremely painful stinging sensation that could last from several hours to 1-2 days, recurring to a lessening degree for several months or more whenever the area is touched, exposed to water, or subjected to temperature change. The injured area becomes covered with small red spots, joining together to form a red, swollen welt. Story 17, I forgot its name, but there's this one tropical tree that has every part of it laced with toxins, like, for example, just touching its leaves. Bark, etc., can cause rashes, and eating its fruit causes slow, painful death. And there's also the fact that it's difficult to remove in an easy way, because if it's burned, the fumes are incredibly toxic and will end you, and if you cut it down, the toxins will still remain active afterwards. And as a not-so-fun fact, it can give you a rash if you stand under it when it rains because the rain will become laced with toxins. Story 18, I almost died from gorging on mangoes. I am allergic to poison ivy and had no idea that mango trees have the same chemical in them. I went to Brazil with my ex-wife, who is Brazilian, and ate a bunch of mangoes in a mango grove. I just peeled them with my teeth. Also, the day before, I opened up a cashew stem after making some drinks with the fruit and happily said, "This is the part we eat where I'm from." Then spit it out. Cashew stems are also full of urushiol. 2 days later, my entire body swelled up, and I had to get pumped full of steroids. The doctors didn't even know what it was. So 2 years later, I did it again. Story 19. Not a botanist, and not actually scary, just incredibly annoying and frustrating to remove. Burdock produces large clumps of burrs that stick to everything, and they have a strong, deep taproot that is impossible to pull out of the ground. Even digging them up is labor intensive. Clever's the leaves are slightly sticky, and the plant produces small green burrs that stick to everything. The plant will quickly cover large sections of ground. I have both of these plants all over my property and dogs that constantly have these burrs stuck to them. Therefore, I hate both of these plants. Story 20, Dendrocnide moroides, the pain bush, which grows in Australia because of course it does. From someone who had the foliage brush against their face. For 2 or 3 days, the pain was almost unbearable. I couldn't work or sleep, then it was pretty bad pain for another fortnight or so. The stinging persisted for 2 years and recurred every time I had a cold shower. There's nothing to rival it. It's 10 times worse than anything else. Story 21, my mom is the biggest plant lover you will ever meet. And when I was a kid, one she made me learn was the difference between Queen Anne's lace and water hemlock. Why? Because the most common one, Queen Anne's lace, is a really pretty flower that is a beneficial weed. And you could even eat it if you were lost in the woods. Not like I have. The other, water hemlock, also grows everywhere and looks very similar, but is so poisonous you can die from a bite of it, or even feel your lips go numb if you use the stem as a whistle, or to spit seeds at someone or whatever. Both grow pretty much all over. I should also note, for all UK Redditors who may be interested, there is a very cool place called the Poison Garden in North England. Story 22, seems like a lot of the obvious answers have been covered, so here's one that's scary in a different sense. Datura stramonium, better known as Gyson weed or Loco weed, is a member of the nightshade family. Its better-known relatives include eggplant, tomatoes, peppers, and tobacco. Datura and other nightshades contain a lot of nasty alkaloids. Gyson weed is notorious among ranchers and farmers, as cows and horses, which eat this plant, tend to end up very sick or dead. Human toxicity is also well known. Ever hear of scopolamine, aka the South American zombie drug, used to make unsuspecting victims totally compliant to their attackers' every demand? Yep, it comes from Datura and its relatives. Now, the crazy part is that some people intentionally eat the Datura plant in order to get high. Used in this way, the plant is most accurately classified as a deliriant. This isn't like LSD, shrooms, weed, ketamine, etc., where in most situations and with responsible usage, you are mostly aware that you are high and you've taken drugs. One key feature of deliriance is that you have no idea that you've completely lost touch with reality. Think schizophrenia or dementia, horrifying multi-layered fantasies filled with bizarre nonsensical events, like Inception, directed by David Lynch. Story 23, I'm not a botanist, but I am a carnivorous plant enthusiast. One that immediately comes to mind is Nepenthes ampullaria, which originally evolved to catch insects, as every other tropical pitcher plant does, but then evolved even more to catch falling leaves instead. So it's a herbivorous, carnivorous plant. Well, omnivorous, if you want to get all technical about it, as they do still catch bugs. And think about that for a second, just the sheer blind ingenuity of it all. Evolution is cool. Story 24, I used to work in a lab that did research on plants collectively called Loco weed, specifically species of the Stanleya and Astragalus genus. We studied their ability to hyperaccumulate selenium and other hexavalent elements, as well as their ability to produce an alkaloid called swainsinine. They had enough selenium, the element beneath sulfur on the periodic table, in them that they smelled like gunpowder. But that wasn't really what made them scary in a way. It was the swainsinine. Swainsinine is a competitive substrate for enzymes that glycosylate, add sugars to proteins, which is especially important in the brain. Livestock that consume these plants in enough quantity would basically shake themselves to death over a few weeks because of the faulty proteins in their brain due to swainsinine exposure. Hence the common name, Loco Crazy. Story 25. As an actual botanist, poisonous plants concern me, and there are others that look pretty scary. But to me, one of the worst is the honey locust. I'm always worried about poking out an eye when I work around one. The other stuff doesn't worry me that much. It's the stuff that people keep in their homes, especially ones with young children, that worry me more. Many common houseplants are toxic in various degrees. I work with lots of thorny shrubs and vines, poison ivy, stinging nettles. Wood nettles are the worst. So the other stuff isn't really that scary. Story 26, Hurang. Botanist here? Chilean Puya chilensis is my pick. It is also known as the sheep-eating plant. It can reach massive sizes, and y'all should really just check it the F out. You won't be disappointed. I guess you could call it passively carnivorous, which to me is the creepy part about it. RHS Garden wisely says, the striking plant, which produces enormous spikes of neon bright green-yellow flowers, conceals a gruesome secret. In its natural habitat in the Andes, it uses its razor-sharp spines to snare and trap sheep and other animals, which slowly starve to death and decay at the base of the plant, providing it with the grisly equivalent of a bag of fertilizer. Story 27, Durians. What kind of evolutionary pressure would make something as heavy as a watermelon morph out rock-solid spikes and perch it at lethal heights? They've got spikes so hard that you could use them as the head of a spiked mace. It'll go through plate mail no problem. Even if it doesn't, it's heavy enough that it'll cause enough blunt trauma to put any wannabe knight out of action long enough for you to land the next blow that will turn him into fertilizer food for the durian. Fruits as heavy as durians typically live on the ground, like watermelons, but not durians. They grow so high up, if a durian dropped you from where it lives, you would die. But it chills 20 meters off of the ground. Then it camps. Killing like coconuts just ain't good enough for it. It's over 30 simultaneous armor-piercing strikes into your cranium. If that doesn't end you, the blunt force trauma will. If that doesn't destroy you, maggots that grow out of the crap that grows on durians will make their way into your brain and turn it into prions or mind control you and walk you off the nearest cliff. If that doesn't end you, well, F, don't come near me.